Welcome back. You're watching World Talks, and I'm your host, Klaudia Czerwińska. Defense officials from some 50 countries are set to meet in Brussels NATO headquarters on Friday as part of the 27th meeting of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, also known as the Ramstein Group. As the fight on the Ukrainian frontlines continue, the country's diplomats are doing their best to bring an end to the war closer. To discuss the latest, I'm joined by Yevheniia Kravchuk, Deputy Chair from the Committee on Humanitarian and Information Policy in Ukraine. Hello, and thank you for joining me on the program. It's great to have you.
Thank you for having me.
So on Friday, the UK and Germany will convene the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, which I mentioned in the intro, at NATO headquarters. What are some of the discussions that you think that will take place there, and what are we to expect from today?
Basically, this meeting happens the next day after the meeting of the coalition of the willing of some countries that are leading in these discussions of having some form of, as they call the reassurance forces, the foreign military contingent in Ukraine that could be deployed in Ukraine after the end of the war. So basically, I think it would be connected, at least countries that were leading in the coalition of the willing, and that's also the Great Britain, Germany on board, will explain what were the results. But also on the, as usual, during the Ramstein meetings, we need not just discussions, but decisions on the, extra air defense systems for Ukraine and extra, shells for the army.
So the defense ministers attending the meeting of the Coalition of the Willing, because I would like to revisit that really quickly, at NATO headquarters on Thursday, say plans are now, I quote, well developed, but that much more work needs to be done. What does well developed mean, and why did the leaders actually mention this in particular? What steps are we going to see next?
We are on the right track, obviously, and now we can see this sort of solution shaping. We don't have a decision, and we do need a more clear shape of the role of these forces, because what they will do, for example, if Russia attacks, right? So what would be their actions? Obviously, the best security guarantee for Ukraine, and we will always believe in it, it's our own army and own forces. But of course, I think this coalition will be developing plans not just on the, boots on the ground after the war, but actually the security on sea, as they mentioned, security on air. So it's quite broader than just deployment of a few brigades somewhere in, central Ukraine.
I guess it's interesting also to look at what Kaja Kallas was talking about, the EU's top diplomat. She was pondering on the goal of the reassurance force. Is it deterrence? Is it monitoring? Is it peacekeeping? Which one do you think the coalition is veering closer to?
Well, that's exactly my point, that we didn't understand the role, and I cannot even predict what would be the final decision. But obviously, Ukraine will need to keep big own military capability and the army, because we will never be sure in someone else as we are sure in our own army. In the case of new attack. But this decision, and whether it's reassurance, whether it's what would be the role, is not ready to be announced. So we'll have to wait, and it will depend also on the number of countries that will be in this coalition. Because let's be frank, and I mean Europe has to understand it. Ukraine has now 800,000 of military on duty, right, in the armed forces. If you count the brigades in Europe, it will be, it's more than Germany, France, Poland, and some other countries altogether. So obviously there have to be some planning in Europe as well, not to be waiting for Russia to attack Europe and not preparing. So the military capabilities of Europe have to expand as well.
which we're on a very close, very defined path of achieving. As we're speaking about the meetings revolving around Ukraine, we cannot forget about the EU-Ukraine Business Forum. And I would like to revisit the words of Ukrainian Prime Minister Shmyhal, who urged for faster membership to the bloc, calling it an investment in Europe's strength. What does this mean? We know obviously that Ukraine is not yet an EU member. What did Mr. Shmyhal mean by those words?
Well, obviously, Ukraine will, contribute to Europeans' defense. In our conversation previously, I mentioned what is the numbers of Ukraine's army, and in the light of possible withdrawal of troops or shortening the troops that Americans have in Europe, that could be a solution. Not to lose the numbers of troops over in Europe. Also in the terms of economics, the bigger the stronger. So Ukraine will contribute, especially in the military tech, because we developed this part of economy rapidly after 2022 especially. So Ukraine right now is the biggest producer of drones, and we produce faster. We're less bureaucrats than in European countries, and that was acknowledged basically by many member states of European Union. For example, Denmark decided to sort of invest in Ukraine's military sector, rather starting their own production, because it's much more expensive and longer. So basically Ukraine could be a producer of military mil-tech for many European countries, and that will be cheaper than to buy from other countries.
I would also like to take a moment to take a look at the minerals meeting. We know that there is a Ukrainian delegation that is meant to meet the U.S. representatives. I hope I'm using the right word here, but how do you think Ukraine will be able to outmaneuver the U.S. to make sure it does close deal with the U.S., yet it keeps the door open for a potential future EU accession? We know that Ukraine is currently seeking closer trade relations with Europe, as we just mentioned a second ago. What about the minerals deal?
Well, the answer is very clear. Ukraine will never be accepting a deal that is against EU inspirations and against EU rules. And that's actually something that United States mentioned, that Ukraine being in European Union is also part of the, the security package or whatever you call it. So I don't think that United States are opposing the idea of Ukraine being in Europe, in European Union.
We know that, but there's also a notion in the new administration of America first. So America's business comes first before anything else.
Well, but that's for their inner politics. And if you sign an international deal, it cannot, and Ukraine will never sign a deal that contradicts EU aspirations. And basically, in the first draft of the deal, that was, and that's the only text so far that Ukraine accepted, but it was rejected afterwards from United States. There was a mention that this deal will not go in contradiction with any of the obligations that Ukraine has in any other national relations, especially with EU.
We heard that recent intelligence reports from Ukraine show that over 150 Chinese nationals fight on the Russian side against Ukraine. How do you think this changed the dynamics of the conflict, and why is it important that we learn about it now?
If you compare how North Koreans fight and how Chinese appear in the Russian army, there is, still a difference. So Chinese actually are using their own documents. So those two Chinese nationals that were captured as prisoners of war in the Donetsk region, they did have a passport with their real name. And North Koreans were disguised as Bashkirs, as the national minority. But North Koreans are planned and are sent in sort of military units. So it's not of them. In the case of Chinese, it's still less numbers, and we don't see it, organized. But still, we asked the Chinese ambassador for explanations, and we expect these explanations from China, how they what is the reason of them being on the occupied Ukrainian territory. But obviously, both North Korea and possibly China are actually trying to see how the actual warfare in 21st century looks like, because their armies were not in combat for many, many years. And this is sort of a training ground, if I may put so, to look how the modern war looks like.
Very shortly, because our time is coming to an end, but we know that the United States and Russia had another prisoner swap take place. What does this tell us about the sort of a relationship and the state of the relationship between the two countries?
Well, I don't think it says anything, because there were sort of swaps before, but I would not see any hidden information there. It's just, I think, one-on-one. I didn't pay really attention, because I do pay attention on Ukrainians prisoners of war and civilian detainees that are in Russian prisons. That's what I care most.
Thank you so much, Yevheniia Kravchuk, Deputy Chair, Committee on Humanitarian and Information Policy in Ukraine. Great to have you.
Thank you.
And so this would be all for now here on World Talks. We're back in just a moment with more news, features, and interviews for you to enjoy, and I'll see you there.